You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is director Brent Wilson. And we're going to be talking about his new documentary, Brian Wilson, Long Promised Road, No Relation. And I have to tell you, this documentary brought tears to my eyes, Brent. It really, really is. It's very, very fascinating and it's really fascinating. I don't know if you remember, though, you've been on my show before.
Of course I remember. Absolutely, I remember, and I'm thrilled to be back. Your Streetlight Harmonies interview was wonderful, and this is where all this began. You were so kind to us about Streetlight Harmonies and my previous documentary, and about doo-wop music, and we had a lovely time. And Brian actually appears in that film, and that's kind of how all this began. So there's a very direct, thin line, Jan, between
it all goes around, right? The 6 degrees of separation. Yes, we met, at the Santa Barbara Film Festival.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah. It was, and I think we were kind of talking offline. You asked about what I was up to, and I told you we were starting to work on this Brian Wilson doc. We were just kind of getting started. And so, yeah, it's wonderful to be back here talking to you. And that tells me that we got it done.
Well, it's great. I'm grateful to have you back on the show. And this is a wonderful documentary. It's so different and unique in the way that you put it together, and just gives us a really, just that wonderful inner view of Brian Wilson, who can be an enigma. Certainly, we have the movie Love and Mercy about him, which I thought was a wonderful film. But this certainly is truly him talking. So tell us a little bit about how you decided to do this film and how it came about.
Sure. And you're right. First of all, I think, Jan, there has been a lot of really great projects on Brian already. Love and Mercy was just a beautiful film. Bill Pohlad's movie. It was just stunning. Don Was had made a beautiful documentary in the 90s, David Leaf. So there'd already been quite a bit done on Brian. But I think Brian is just one of those personalities that you could never, ever truly capture in one project or two projects. I mean, it would be like, what if there was only one documentary on, George Washington or,
or Lincoln.
Or Lincoln, yes, exactly. Or, what if there was only one book on Mozart? I think Brian is of that category, and you could never truly tell his story in one film. So after seeing Love and Mercy, and then we did, Brian appears in Streetlight Harmonies, which is how we had met. And he talks a little bit about doo-wop music, the influence doo-wop music had on him for Streetlight. And we got to be good friends with his manager. And I had felt there was still something there to be told in Brian's life, particularly, I think, in these last 10 years or so, almost kind of where Love and Mercy leaves off. Mm-hmm. If you recall the end of Love and Mercy, he gets back with Melinda, and they're going to get married and kind of begin their life. But since that moment, Brian's adopted several children. He has toured nonstop. He's released several great albums. And so he was really doing things at 75 that he was afraid to do at 25. And I found that really intriguing. I thought, here was a man at 25 years old who couldn't commit to a family, who couldn't commit to a life beyond the pain that was in his head. And he couldn't tour, he couldn't enjoy this audience reactions that his bandmates were receiving, performing his songs. And yet here he was at 75 now with the courage and the ability to be able to do that. And I thought, that's a story I want to tell. And so we just reconnected with Brian's management, pitched them our idea. They said yes. And of course I make it sound really simple, but it's always never that simple. But
no, never is. I think there's something about when you get older, you become fearless. I think, you figure who cares what happens, just go for it, just do it. And let the chips fall where they may. And I think perhaps that's, maybe where he is. And certainly his relationship with Melinda certainly has given him a lot of strength and whatnot. Talk a little bit about, in doing the research, there was a connection with your father and your first introduction to the Beach Boys and their music. Do you mind telling that story?
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. I guess you get a cold chill. So, so if you see the hair standing up, that's what it is. It's not cold in here. Yeah, when I was 9 years old, my father passed away, and my parents had divorced, and we went and got all of his things out of his house that you have to do, and brought everything back to our house. And I don't know, subconsciously trying to kind of discover who my father was at that age. And I was going through his record collection. I was just kind of flipping through all of his records. And I came across an album that had a really cool cover with some guys standing around like in really cool blue jackets, standing in front of a Corvette Stingray. And I was like, well, I don't know who this is, but this looks really cool. And so I put the album on and I played it. And the very first song that came out is a song that Brian wrote called Shutdown. And the lyrics are, I won't sing it, but the lyrics are, tack it up, Buddy's gonna shut you down. And my father's name was Buddy. And so I instantly just thought, oh my God, these guys are singing about my father. Because my father was also kind of a weekend drag racer. He was kind of Milner from American Graffiti, if you remember that movie. He was that guy. And so from then on, yeah, the Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys have been a part of my life. And I saw them in concert that same summer, 9 years old. My aunt took me to see them, and I had the best time. And I, was telling everybody in high school, in the 1980s, when, being a Beach Boys fan wasn't cool, that this is one of the greatest bands in the world, when everybody else is listening to the Rolling Stones. I was listening to the Beach Boys. And so they have always been a part of my life. And Brian has always been a thread. I proposed to my wife using the lyrics from Wouldn't It Be Nice just a few years ago. And that was one of the reasons we met, was through her love of that song as well. So it's a true blessing and a true honor to be even just a small thread in Brian's story.
Wow, that's amazing. It really is amazing. I had the honor of meeting Al Jardine. Actually sat with him at a luncheon a number of years ago, and his wife Marianne. And I told him then, and the reason I'm in California is because of the Beach Boys. I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey, actually, and the New Jersey shore. But I always wanted to be in California and be a California girl. And eventually, later on in life, I arrived here. But I had to go get the convertible and grow my hair longer and get that whole look going anyhow. But they have influenced so many of us through the years, so many of us.
I can't imagine how many people have your story. I mean, I think Brian, Al, and the Beach Boys are probably responsible for half of the population boom of LA in the 60s.
Probably.
I mean, there's that song that Brian wrote for Jan and Dean, Surf City, and the first line is 2 girls for every boy. Oh, what guy doesn't want to go there?
Right.
The sun's always out, everybody's beautiful, girls are on the beach. It's just, I absolutely can imagine that he's responsible for 50% of the population boom.
I agree. I think everybody wanted to come to California. That, and then also to San Francisco for the, the hippie movement during the 60s.
Exactly.
Both,
yes. Yeah.
LA and San Francisco covered for sure. Well, let's talk about the way that you did this film, because you did it in a very unique way, and explain why you did it the way that you did, and talk about Jason Fine and his relationship with Brian and go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, no, there wouldn't be a film without Jason Fine. It's it just became an absolute blessing to be able to work with Jason. And what had happened was I had, I wish I could, say that I had this original idea, this crazy idea from the very beginning, but I didn't. I was going to do a traditional doc. I thought that I could create an environment where Brian could kind of feel safe in interviewing. And you kind of see in the beginning of the film, you get just a little, I give like a little taste of that at the very beginning of the film, where Brian sits down at the piano and I try to ask him a question, and Brian gives me the best answer he can, but Brian hates interviews. He just does not like to be interviewed. And you can see it on any YouTube clip. You can kind of see it on any talk show. He's just not comfortable under the lights and with a camera on him and a microphone. It's just not something he's comfortable with. So I tried, failed miserably, thought my career was over. This is it, and I'll never work again. And Gene Sievers, Brian's manager, suggested that I reach out to Jason, who's the editor of Rolling Stone at the time, and said that Brian and Jason had been friends for 20 years, and Jason had been writing about Brian, but they're more than just writer and subject. They were friends, and they are friends. So I reached out to Jason, and we set up a phone call, my producer and I, Teresa. And right before the phone call, I read an article that Jason had written called Brian Wilson's Better Days, and for Rolling Stone. Beautiful article, came out about, 7 years ago. And in that article, Jason talks about cruising around LA with Brian, and they go get sushi, they go see the movie The Wrecking Crew, they even went and got like a massage, a massage place, and they're just kind of hanging out and having beers. And I thought to myself, that's the movie I want to make. That's the movie I want to see as a fan. And so Jason, at the end of the phone call, made the mistake of saying, well, this sounds like a great project. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. And, kind of screwed up with that one, because I said, well, Jason, I've actually got this crazy idea. I said, what if we recreate that article in some way? Let's put you in a car with Brian. We'll rig up the car with cameras in it and microphones in it so that Brian doesn't have to wear a microphone. There's no cameraman, and it's just you and Brian driving around LA, visiting the places that are important to Brian in his life. And, let's let that be the thread of the film. And Jason was hesitant at first. He said, look, he goes, these articles, I'll spend sometimes weeks getting these articles, because sometimes Brian can go an hour or 2 hours and not even say a word. And he goes, but of course, I don't ever press him or push him. And I think that's the secret to the relationship is that Jason never infringes upon Brian. And he goes, so, we could be driving in that car for 2 hours and you're not going to get anything. And I was like, look, the old adage is tape is cheap. So I was like, let's give it a try and see what happens. So Jason flew out from New York. We rigged up this car with 3 cameras, but we wanted high definition cameras and high-end cameras with nice lenses so that it would look cinematic. I didn't want it to look like Carpool Karaoke, and that's certainly no knock on that show, but Carpool Karaoke is only 5-6 minutes long. I needed to be able to hold the audience's attention for, an hour and a half. And we gave it a try, and within 10 minutes, Brian, before we even left Brian's neighborhood, he starts talking and opening up, and I'm in this follow car listening behind, and I within 10 minutes knew this was going to work. And I just needed to have the faith, I guess, and the confidence that the audience would accept this unusual format. And that was the leap of faith, I think, at that point was, could and would audiences come along for this ride?
They certainly will, for sure. It's just more realistic than sitting, I loved it actually, and all the different places they went to that were important or are important to Brian and his life. I thought that was really interesting and very touching too. When he picked all the music too. Talk about that. Talk about that process and choosing the music and what that was about.
One of the things that we did in the film and one of the things that I love about Brian is that Brian loves his own music. He really likes his own music, which I think is something something that, at least in my experience, is kind of unusual for artists. Like, I don't like to watch my films after they're done. It's like, I don't want to see them. And you hear that with actors, like, oh, I made this movie and I've never seen it. Or I watched it once and I've never watched it again. Or Stephen King said he's never read one of his books, So I think there's this perception that artists don't like, their own material. Brian loves his own music. He likes his songs. He's proud of his music. And I think it brings him good memories. So we loaded up an iPhone just full of every Brian Wilson Beach Boys song. And, we put it in the car. And when Brian wanted to hear a song, Jason would, very delicately while driving with these cameras on the dashboard, driving California's most precious cargo, try on the 405, which is, it's its own nightmare. Try to find these songs that Brian would ask for. And that's where the title comes from. He just kind of kept asking for Long Promise Road over and over again. It's Okay, which is kind of a rare Beach Boys song that he uses as a mantra. And so, yeah, he would just kind of, hey, Jason, do you have, The Night Was So Young? And Jason would pull it up. So what's really neat about the film is that Brian, for all intents and purposes, narrates the film and provides the soundtrack, to his own movie. And that's, as a fan, that's really cool. I love that.
It's very cool. It's very unique, different, and very cool. And very touching when one of the songs, and I can't remember which one, and it was co-written with a friend of his.
Yes, yeah, Long Promise Road, Jack Riley.
Okay.
Yep, that's our title track, and
Right.
it was a song that he did. He kept asking for it, and it's interesting because it's not a song that's really associated very much with Brian. Brian's brother Carl wrote the song with Jack Riley, who was the manager of the Beach Boys at the time. And Brian wrote on it and has a writing credit and sings on it, sings backgrounds on it, but it's not his song, right? It was mainly Carl's and Jack's song. But he just loves the song. He's so proud of his brother Carl that he talks about in the film, and him stepping up as a producer. And so he asked to hear the song once, and they're playing it. And Jason just kind of, mentions to him that Jack Riley, who was the co-writer of the song and the Beach Boys manager in the 70s, had passed away. And Jason had thought that Brian knew because it had happened to, several years ago. And Brian didn't know. And so we capture that moment, and you see that moment, and you see the pain on his face, and you see the hurt. And it was difficult to watch, and it was difficult to even include in the film. I was really torn about whether or not to even use it. Jason and I had some conversations, but ultimately we decided that, this is what it's like for Brian every day. The goal of the film was to walk a mile in Brian's shoes. And, this is what it's like for this guy every day. His emotions are so real and they're so raw. And I think that's why he's such an amazing songwriter. Is I think his ability to connect with emotions it's at a next level. It's beyond my level. I can see a photograph and connect with emotion, but he'll connect at a different level, or he'll hear a song and it's deeper for him. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's either very happy or very sad. And because he just his emotions are just that much more raw. So that was just one of those moments where, after some debate, we thought, we owed it to the audience, and we owed it for them to understand what it's like to be with Brian. And that moment is very touching. And it is, and afterwards, Jason collapsed in my arms and goes, "Oh my God, I thought he knew." Jason felt terrible.
Yeah.
It's like, I thought he knew.
But it's so real, and you're right, so raw and genuine. So I think I'm glad you included it in the film. I really do. I mean, I started crying too watching it. It's very touching. Watching him, I mean, so many creative geniuses suffer from depression and, manic depression or whatever, because I think because they can't really, it's hard for them. They're on such a different plane than many other people. I just believe that they have a harder time dealing with the reality of life, the mundane, the everydayness of life. And so, and that's what creates, their feeling, the highs and the lows that they go through. And I related to this because my father, he died young, but Brian looks like my father. What my father might have looked like if he had lived longer. He died at 56, but he's the same kind of hairstyle as my dad, and my dad did suffer from depression, manic depression. So I just really related to this. I didn't have any idea that I was going to relate on such a deep level. Sort of like you with your father's story. This also, again, was personal for me in watching it. So interesting.
I'm sorry to hear that. But I think you're right. I think that half of Brian's story is a story of mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And, half of the story is music. It's 50% of his life, but the other 50% is now mental health, and his courage to be open about his mental health and to deal with his mental health on a daily basis. And, it takes a lot of guts for him to get out of bed every day. And it takes a lot of guts for him to get out on that stage. And it's his story is a story of mental health. And there was we screened it at Tribeca and then at Nashville, at the Nashville Film Festival and the Tribeca Film Festival. And I would say the people that would come up to me, I'd say 90% of the times, 10% of the time would be like, oh my gosh, I loved Brian Wilson. I love Brian Wilson's music. His music has been the soundtrack of my life. That was maybe 10% of the people. I'd say 90% of the people that came up, and a lot of people came up and were moved by the film, which meant so much to us. But they would come up and say, I didn't know much about Brian Wilson or his music, but I know his story about mental health. And I know this person in my family, or I have mental health issues, and that gives me strength. And that's been some of the greatest responses I've heard about the film. And one of the most, I think, just beautiful attributes of Brian's life is that people, I think, are inspired by Brian. If Brian Wilson can get out of bed, why can't I? And if Brian Wilson can go out on stage and do that, why can't I go to work? And that's not the answer, of course. Mental health is a very complicated issue, but it certainly is a beautiful first step, right? And Brian, I think, provides that to people. His life is miraculous. I think Elton John says it. He goes, he doesn't just deserve the accolades for the music, he deserves the accolades for how he's lived his life. And I think that's 100% right.
I agree. And I've said through the years that, mental illness is just treated so differently than if we found out somebody had cancer. Oh, well, we give them all kinds of sympathy, but, mental illness does not get the same kind of sympathy, or, people look at it very, very differently. My father died of a heart attack, had nothing to do with manic depression. We got that under control, thank heavens. But, it's still a hard thing. And I know many people who do suffer from it. So it's a very important thing. But by the way, you won a grand jury prize at the Nashville Film Festival.
We did.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's
thank you very
exciting.
much. Thank you. Yep. It was wonderful. We had a great time down there. It's a beautiful city, lovely hosts.
Oh yes, my brother lives in Nashville. My brother and sister-in-law, and I went there for my niece's wedding. I love Nashville. It's a great town.
Just a great town to have a good time in, isn't it? Great
Yes.
food.
Yeah, very good time. And I understand that you are there's going to be an Oscar campaign for Best Original Song for the song "Right Where I Belong," which is a new song that Brian wrote for this film. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, he co-wrote it, and co-produced it with Jim James of My Morning Jacket. Brian wrote this beautiful melody that he had, and we were making the film, and I knew we wanted some original music in the film. I wanted to see Brian in the studio. That was part of my original visions. I wanted to show the audience, this is what it's like to watch Brian make music. And I wanted the audience to see that. But right during filming, Brian had back surgery. And we had to shut down for like 9 months because of this back surgery that he had. And, back surgery is, of course, no joke. And it's such a difficult thing to recover from, and particularly if you're in your 70s. And Brian had a really tough time with it. And we went into the studio after that point, and Brian recorded a bunch of great new music that we're really excited is going to be able to get out. But he had this one beautiful melody that he wrote. But he was in a lot of pain, Jan. He was still in tremendous amount of pain from his back. And come to find out, a day or two after we finished in the studio, he went back to see his doctor, and he had to have a second back surgery. And because he was having the back surgery, the pain was causing a lot of mental issues because of the pain,
Right.
which is a pretty common thing. And we learned, and Brian talked about this. He canceled some shows. He had to cancel some tours and things like that. But he left us with this beautiful melody. And so I approached Jim James, and
That's
Jim
great.
had sang on Long Promise Road with Brian, and he goes, I'd be thrilled. So him and Brian collaborated together, and now we've got this amazing new song for the film.
Great
And
song.
can't wait for people to hear it.
Me too. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. Where can people see this film before we?
Sure. Yep. We'll be in select theaters starting November 17th, all around the country, and then on demand, day and date, November 19th. So on all your usual video on demand and streaming platforms.
Great. Everybody, even if you're a Beach Boys fan, Brian Wilson fan, please seek this out. Even if you're not, it's music that you should be aware of if you've never listened to it before, and will give you a new perspective. So thank you, Brent, for being back on the show. I look forward to having you back on when you have your next movie.
Absolutely. Let's make a date right now. The next movie is, yes, we have to keep this going.
Yes, we do. We definitely do. Well, it's great to see you. If you have missed any of the Jan Price shows all about movies, you can go to my website, thejanpriceshow.com, where all of my shows are archived. You can even listen probably to the interview I did with Brent several years ago. Also, you can listen on your favorite podcast network, the iHeart Podcast Network, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. And also, you can find us at Twitter and at Instagram at The Jan Price Show. Thank you all for listening.